What I'm going to demonstrate on is pewter. When you, here, I'll hand this around. Here's the finial that I just kind of roughed out yesterday. The way you do this, let's see if I've got the other piece here. Essentially, you drill a hole in a block of wood, and there it is. Once you're done with it, you take it to a bandsaw, just like that, and then you slice it in a couple of places where you get close to this block. It sits in there, and you use a chisel and pop it apart, and there you've got your rough piece of pewter. Okay, I melt it in a piece of equipment that's meant for melting lead to cast bullets. It's just a little melting pot. It goes up to about 900 degrees. Pewter melts at 550 degrees, roughly 575. So it melts real easily, and you just pour it into a little mold you make like this. This one's made out of cherry. A lot of times I'll use maple, and either one of which works. I think the best thing you can do on these is to dry them real good. Like you could put them in an oven at 160 degrees for a half an hour, just to get the moisture out of them, so when the hot pewter goes in there, it doesn't tend to malform quite as much or bend. Okay, but it's pretty straightforward. Nothing to that. So anyhow, you get this piece like this.
Where do you get your scrap pewter? What you're going to use to melt?
I get that off of eBay. You just put in pewter ingots,
Okay.
and you can buy it by the pound for approximately $10 to $12 a pound. Okay, and you just get it in small ingots, and you just put it in a melting pot, melt it down. There's a little bit of dross on the top, and I just take a spoon and clean that off, and it pours real simple.
So how much is that you've got there? Is that a?
I don't know. I would guess maybe under a pound, a little bit, something like that. Here you go. Yeah, it's heavy metal, but you know. So anyhow. Then you just go ahead and check it up between centers. Try to get the center as best you can. A lot of times I'll go ahead and try to get it pretty accurately and try to find the center on it. It won't be perfect, but it'll be all right to start from, because I can clean it up and bring it to center. So, tighten it up a little bit. And you just start bringing it around. It's a detail gouge. I just got this cut with a 35-degree grind on it to be a detail gouge. Okay, you can use any of a number of things. Sometimes I'll use the carbide, which also will cut fine on that.
Take the edge off the tool pretty quickly.
It dulls it pretty quickly. It's metal, but it's a real soft metal, so I don't think it's really a dramatic change that way, if you know what I mean. It doesn't dull it terribly. But yeah, I think you do have to sharpen it up a little bit more.
Got one of those easy Woodturners.
Yes, it is.
Do you like them?
Pardon?
Do you like them? Do you like the tools?
I like the detail tool, and I like this all right. It takes a little bit of a learning curve. If you come into it flat, it's easy to catch. I finally learned, somebody told me that I had to put it at roughly a 45-degree angle for it to work well for me. Now, some guys don't have that problem, but I've heard of people grinding a flat on this so that it gets it at 45 degree and it's easier to bring across that way. But I find it works a lot better for me and doesn't catch if I bring it up to roughly 45 degrees when I'm coming across. The two things about pewter, or I suppose any metal as far as that's concerned, is that obviously it's harder than wood, so that when you're making something it takes longer. And secondly, it's not flexible. In that when you're working with wood and you're working with a say a finial in the fine area in it where you get it pretty thin, you'll notice that the wood will bend a little bit as you turn it. You know, as you press into it, it'll kind of bend away from you a little bit as you cut and all like this. Metal won't do that. It will bend, and it'll bend permanently. Okay, it won't flex the way that wood will. It will bend, and it'll make a permanent bend. And once you reach the point of elasticity, it'll bend permanently. So you can't put as much pressure on it. What's that? I've not tried to turn brass. I've talked to people who have done that, and you can do that, but it's harder yet. It is harder than pewter. Pewter is about as soft as it gets for metal. And even so, I can't take heavy passes the way you can with a piece of wood. You've got to take smaller cuts.
Do you just polish it when you finish it, or do you have to put a clear lacquer on it?
What's that now?
When you're finishing, do you just polish it and you're done, or?
What I normally do is go through different grits. Okay, with metal you go up through 2000 grit, and it's almost the same as polishing. When you get to that point, it's real fine, and then you can use a metal polish of some sort if you want, but
you don't lacquer it.
you can. The problem with pewter and silver and a lot of different things is that they can tarnish over time, right? And so you can put a lacquer over it, but you've got to put a really light lacquer on it, not one that's meant for wood, but meant for a little bit lighter stuff, because a heavy lacquer doesn't look right on it. It tends to sag and doesn't look quite right, so it'd have to be something real light. Some of this is the way it casts too. I mean, it may be a little bit deeper on the inclusion and all that. That may have something to do with the moisture in the material that you cast it into. Whenever you're casting it, it may leave a little bit more porosity. So again, it's probably a good idea to use a fine-grained wood and then something that's relatively dry. Oop. Okay. Now, take all of this that you take out of this, all these scraps, and dump them back into the pot, and melt them right back down again. So you don't have a lot of loss in there. So roughly I'm into round on this. I've got a little bit of inclusion here, but I will turn that out as I go along. So the next thing I want to do is I want to cut this so that my finial base will be approximately a 1/2 inch. Okay. We've got a ways to go yet. I'm right about at 3/4 of an inch as compared to the outside of being 0.864. So I want to bring it down to a 1/2 inch. It doesn't cut as cleanly as when you try to shear it this way as wood does. Again, it's a little different property.
What's the significance of the 1/2 inch?
As a rule of thumb, I just use that. If I'm going to stick finial into the top piece, I'll drill the hole in what I'm inserting into a 1/2 inch. So
Okay.
that's just a rule of thumb. It doesn't necessarily have to be,
Okay.
right? It's just kind of this is what I kind of am used to doing. I don't know whether people may use 3/4 or whatever. It just depends on the size of your outside, particularly your finial.
Sure.
You want some kind of shoulder to insert into the top, right? So this is just kind of a rule of thumb. The one that I passed around there, I made that one with the shoulder a little bit bigger pour. I actually drilled a 1.5 inch hole an inch deep, and then with a Forster bit, which centers itself, drove an inch hole further down so that I would shape out to 1.5 inches, so you could put a finial with a bigger base on it. So pouring and casting metal is not my forte, but there's just all kinds of different things you can do that will give you a different shape, so that maybe you have to take off less metal, and or that you can make a bigger base of your finial, longer, whatever you want to do. I'm under 6.60, so I'll go ahead and take it out of here and put it in check. Like anything else, when you're doing a finial, you'd like to keep it between centers as long as you can, or supported as long as you possibly can. So it's just the same with this, because of the problem you get with having a tendency to bend.
I couldn't see from over here, but did you drive that with a spur? That was when you
Yes,
first started.
Yeah,
just
I
a
use
regular
this,
spur in there.
just a regular spur like this,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And just between centers like you normally would, and it's on this end you've got a regular little spur that comes with.
Yeah, I didn't see how you
Tailstock.
drove it. I didn't know if you had to cut crosshairs in there, so the spur.
I didn't in this case. I
Okay.
just kind of pushed it on center, which is why I had a little bit of slippage problem early on.
Okay.
Okay. I'm just using this detailing tool. As I said, with metal, it's a slower process. But it does cut pretty well. I'm just trying to get out a rough contour of a finial, and shaping a little bit toward a base. Alright, let's see if we thin and smooth this down a little bit. Alright, so I've got a basic shape that I want, but now I'm going to go ahead and clean this up. As you notice, I leave everything with support as long as I possibly can, because like I said, this part right here, if you get it too thin without support, it'll bend. Ride the bevel a little bit better. Problem, you get all this junk around here and you can't really see well. Your lighting kind of reflects the same color as you're into, and you can't really see your contrast. Alright. These ones I've made on these tend to be a little bit more robust and rounder, just because I guess I don't want it to continue to take off more than I need to. And it's also because I have a tendency to want to make a something with a lot of curvature, if you know what I'm saying. A real long, thin finial would have a tendency to bend real easily. So I tend to make it more robust across here, and see if I can kind of, and then that way I don't have to make quite as thin a finial there. But this is just me talking. I mean, you know, I don't claim to be a finial expert by any stretch of the imagination. It's just
What is pewter, the alloy out? Or in the middle?
tin and I think there's tin and zinc in it, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm not sure if there's other stuff too.
I think that's what it is. It's 10 and 8
A little flat across here. Alright. Now, I think I'm going to go ahead and move my clean this up a little bit. if I can without bending it. Okay. All right. Get out. I'll go ahead and try to make a little bit of a thinner, but it's very easy at this point to make a permanent bend. Tried to write it better. I might got my detailer in here. Alright. Let me see if I can clean that up a little bit and then now, as you go through your different grits of sandpaper, and I've got several in here, it'll clean up your lines and grooves a lot better. If you look at it, you can still see some lines and grooves in it. This, I have a tendency to clean a lot of that up. Probably if I was on my own lathe at home, I'd slow this down to about 500 for sanding. Again, when you get to the thin part, you can't put much pressure on it. Oh yeah. Oh, let's go a little more.
What grit are you on now?
I'm just using 240, I think, at this point, because I've got a little place in here I want to take off, and need a little bit coarser grid for that. I'm doing. Got a little marking. Kind of the boring part of it. It's not really very interesting yet. Yeah, still got a little bit of that. At that point, you just go ahead and start going through your grits. I guess I'm not going to really show going through all the grits because I think you guys have already seen that 100 times before, done it yourself.
That thing's so thin.
Anyhow, other than sanding it and polishing it, that's essentially what you got.
Hey, thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.